The silence in the savannah is no longer peaceful. It's exhaustion. Here, the sun doesn't rise just to illuminate. It rises to consume. In an ecosystem that for centuries symbolized abundance, life is now measured in milliliters of mud and in kilometers crossed over a land that turns to dust beneath every step. In recent months, entire regions of East Africa have watched their grazing lands vanish. In Kenya, extreme drought has led to the loss of thousands of large animals, turning migration corridors into long, silent trails of carcasses and bones, bleached white by the sun. What used to be a route of survival has become a record of those who couldn't keep going. And this isn't just a seasonal shift. It's a system collapse. The worst dry spell in decades has reduced rivers to thin ribbons of murky water and pushed herds farther and farther in search of food that no longer provides enough energy to keep the body moving. Group leaders still guide their herds along paths that once led to water. Now those paths often lead only to dry ground. At the same time, scarcity forces encounters that were never meant to happen. Predators and prey converge on the same points, not to hunt, but to drink. Hunger changes behavior, breaks hierarchies, and turns every decision into a risk. What unfolds here is not only a struggle between animals, it's a struggle against time, against the environment, and against the limits of the body itself. This is the story of mortal hunger, the desperate fight for survival in the savannah. The savannah's collapse doesn't begin with death. It begins with something far harder to notice: the invisible loss of value in what still looks like food. At first glance, the grass is still there. It covers the ground, sways in the wind, keeps the landscape looking alive from a distance. But inside, the plant has changed. Without a regular rainfall, grass shifts into survival mode. Growth slows. The sugars and proteins that sustain large herbivores drop sharply, and the fibers become tough, dry, and energy poor. For animals that depend on this pasture, it becomes a biological trap. They keep eating, but every bite delivers less than the body needs. The math stops working. The energy spent walking, chewing, and digesting becomes greater than the energy gained. That's when hunger stops being a feeling and becomes real physical breakdown. The first changes appear in behavior. Herds spread out more because they must cover larger areas to find any patch of forage that still holds value. Journeys that once took hours begin to take days. Calves start to fall behind. Older or injured individuals slow down and become fragile points within a group that has to keep moving. This process reshapes the savanna's dynamics. Where there used to be well-defined routes, new trails appear, marked by hooves on hardened ground and dust lifted by the wind. Resting points disappear because stopping too long means losing the only advantage that remains: the ability to keep going. With less energy available at the base of the food chain, the effects spread upward. Slower, weaker prey change the pattern of interactions around them. It's not only the number of hunts that shifts, but the way they unfold. Hunger begins to redraw who chases, who flees, and who can no longer do either. And while the pasture remains visible, dry and misleading, the true enemy stays unseen. The deficit growing inside every body, kilometre after kilometre under the sun. When food stops sustaining life, the struggle naturally shifts to an even harder limit: water. In the savanna, hydrological collapse rarely happens all at once. It builds in layers. First the rivers drop, then the banks pull back. Bends become isolated pools, and what once flowed turns into mud trapped in low depressions. The water that remains isn't just scarce. It's often warm, murky and contested, completely changing how animals move and behave. Those few remaining water points begin to gather species that would normally keep their distance. The need to drink outweighs the instinct to avoid danger, so what was scattered becomes crowded. What used to be a quick stop becomes forced lingering because reaching the water is harder. The soil gives way, the edge slips, and one careless step can mean getting stuck in mud or staying exposed for too long. Competition in this setting doesn't always look like constant fighting. It happens through pressure, shoving, blocking access, hierarchy, and above all, priority. The strongest drink first, the weakest wait, and when their turn finally comes, the water is worse and their bodies are closer to the edge. At the same time, drought creates a dangerous predictability. With fewer options, paths repeat, and trails to water become carved corridors in the earth, almost mandatory routes. That means risk stops being random and becomes expected. Because any animal that needs to survive will be forced to appear there sooner or later. And that's where the savannah turns cruel in a different way. When water becomes a funnel that concentrates life, but also concentrates vulnerability, shrinking the margin for error to almost nothing. A slip, a few extra seconds exposed, hesitation at the edge, slower movement from weakness. Details that would mean nothing in normal times now decide who drinks and walks away and who collapses on the path. And as these points shrink and pressure rises, the landscape begins telling another story in the sky. Because it isn't only those who drink who appear there. It's also those watching from a distance, waiting for the moment when the body finally gives in. When water concentrates everyone in the same place, the logic of hunting changes. In normal periods, predators rely on opportunity, territory, and enough energy to pursue and bring down prey. In severe drought, the problem is that hunger hits both sides at once. Prey arrive weaker, yes, but predators arrive more depleted too, creating a paradox. There is more vulnerability around them, but less strength available to turn vulnerability into food. That's where failures start to matter. A hunt that doesn't succeed isn't just another day without eating. It's energy lost that may never be regained. So many predators calculate longer, watch more, and choose targets with greater caution, because chasing the wrong animal can be fatal. hunts become shorter, riskier, and often more desperate. Instead of long chases, there are quick attempts, sudden strikes during moments of distraction, attacks where the prey is already compromised. And the margin for error nearly vanishes. At the same time, the concentration around water creates a kind of meeting ground, where conflict isn't only between predator and prey, but among predators themselves. Species that would normally avoid direct confrontation converge on the same resource. Increasing disputes over carcasses, food theft, harassment, and even fights that wouldn't be worth it at another time of year. Hunger pushes behavior to its limits. What used to be strategy becomes necessity. And when hunts fail repeatedly, the savannah enters an even harsher cycle. More animals fall from exhaustion, and death begins to appear without attack, without chase, simply as a consequence of the body's collapse. At this stage, carcasses become predictable events on the landscape, not exceptions. Nature begins to produce food through loss. This is when scavengers stop being background and become indicators of what's happening. Vultures, for example, don't need noise or announcement. They red collapse from above. The circle of birds in the sky isn't a dramatic scene. It's a practical signal that the system is under too much pressure. Where they descend, something has already given way. Where they appear often, the savannah is operating at the limit. And that also changes the behavior of everything around, because a carcass during drought is rare wealth. It draws competition, draws danger, and creates an instant hierarchy. Those who arrive first try to take as much as possible. Those who arrive later try to steal. And those too weak simply watch. Often what decides who eats isn't absolute strength, but the physical condition of that day, that hour, in that exact place. When the savannah collapses, it isn't only the great herbivores and great predators that change. The most adaptable animals, those able to adjust behavior quickly, take on a central role in the landscape of hunger. Among them, baboons stand out. In more stable times, baboons feed on a wide range of resources: fruit, seeds, roots, insects, and small animals. But when drought advances and high-quality food disappears, their behavior shifts. The troop begins moving with almost no pause, sweeping the ground for any remaining source of energy. Dry leaves are flipped, branches are snapped, and the soil is searched inch by inch. Hunger affects not only what they eat, but how they organize. The hierarchy inside the troop tightens. Dominant individuals secure access first to whatever food is found. While weaker ones are pushed to the edges, where searching is harder and risk is greater. Small conflicts become frequent, because in drought, even a single fruit or insect can matter. The burden of scarcity shows most clearly in females with young. Carrying an infant on the back means extra energy expenditure at a time when every calorie counts. The mother must walk farther, forage longer, and at the same time support another body that depends entirely on her. The troop keeps moving, and those who can't maintain the pace are left behind. As hunger intensifies, baboons also drift toward more dangerous places. Contested water points, human paths, carcasses, and the edges of farmland become part of the route. The search for food pushes the troop into environments where risk rises, but need outweighs caution. As the drought drags on, the savannah begins to change in ways that aren't immediately obvious from a distance. Color fades first, then sound. What was once a mosaic of movement becomes a quiet expanse, broken only by wind dragging dust across hardened ground. Trees lose leaves, branches stand exposed like dead frameworks, and the horizon becomes defined more by still shapes than by life in motion. In regions where drought repeats month after month, the effects stop being merely individual and become population level. Birth rates drop because weakened bodies can't sustain pregnancy or milk production. Fewer young are born, and those that enter an environment already at its limit. Species that depend on softer, more nutritious vegetation begin to vanish from entire areas, pushed toward regions where some moisture still remains in the soil. Smaller animals, often overlooked, also enter the equation. Small antelopes shrink their ranges and move more at night to avoid extreme heat. aardvarks find the ground too hard to dig, reducing access to subterranean insects. Ground birds concentrate activity around the few damp patches left, competing for seeds and invertebrates that were once spread across the landscape. Even insects shift the rhythm of the savannah. With fewer flowers and less organic matter, activity declines, affecting everything that relies on them as a primary food source. Collapse spreads from the bottom upward in a silent chain that doesn't appear in a single scene, but builds over time. The wide empty spaces begin telling a different story from the one told by encounters and fights. There are entire areas where no recent passage is visible, no new trails, no fresh marks in the soil. These stretches stop being routes and become boundaries, not because anyone defended them, but because they offer nothing to those who try to cross. The few animals still moving through these spaces carry signs of a world that has lost its safety margin. Movement slows, pauses become more frequent, and decisions look more careful, as if every step must be measured. The savannah doesn't expel life all at once. It narrows the options. Field data reflects this clearly. In prolonged droughts, mortality rises not only during the hottest period, but also in the months that follow when bodies are already compromised and cannot recover, even if some water returns. The landscape may change first, the population follows later, and what remains is not the image of a battle won or a cycle neatly closed, but a system in constant adjustment, losing and regaining life as rhythms that don't follow a storyline. There is no exact moment when hunger ends. There are only phases when it becomes less visible. In the savannah, the story does not conclude with rain or immediate renewal. It continues in silence, between trails that fade and routes that emerge elsewhere, while the land holds the marks of those who passed and those who couldn't keep going.